Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Welcome back to my channel, English for You, the English Gate. Today, inshallah, we will continue explaining and study chapter 5 from A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. القصة المقررة على مدارس اللغات وابنائنا في الخارج. Today, inshallah, we will study chapter 5. The title of the chapter is A Moment of Terror. لحظات من الرعب. Let's start with the summary of that chapter. 4 months had passed since Charles Darnley's trial. It was a Sunday afternoon and Jarvis Lorry had come to visit Dr. Manette in his house in London. Mr. Lorry noticed the shoemaker's bench and tools in the doctor's bedroom. He wondered why the doctor still keeps those terrible reminders of his years in prison. لماذا يحتفظ بهذه الأشياء التي تذكره بأيام السجن؟ Miss Pross isn't pleased with receiving many visitors whom she believed unworthy of her Lady Bird. كانوا غير جديرين بوقت سيدتها Lucy. She was fond of Lucy. She believed that only one man could be worthy of her dear brother, Solomon, if only he hadn't made that one mistake in his life. Solomon's mistake was taking all of his sister's belongings years ago and leaving her in poverty. أخذ كل ممتلكات أخته وتركها تعيش في فقر. طبعا احنا هنكتشف بعد كده سولومون هو المتخفي and he was disguised under a false name, Parser. We will see that later in the next chapters. Dr. Manette and Lucy entered the room and they all went out into the garden, and then Charles Darnley arrived. They were talking of old buildings in London. كانوا يتحدثون عن بعض المباني القديمة في لندن when Charles Darnley told them a curious thing about the tower he was imprisoned in before his trial. تحدث عن البرج الذي كان مسجون فيه قبل محاكمته. While some repairs were being made, workmen came across an old cell that hadn't been used for many years. Every stone of its wall was covered with names, dates, and complaints written by the prisoners. كانت الحوائط مغطاة بأسماء وتواريخ وشكاوى مكتوبة من المساجين. While digging under the floor, بينما العمال يحفرون في الأرض, the workmen found the ashes of paper, بقايا أوراق. Some unknown prisoner had written a note of and hidden it from the jailer. كتب بعض المذكرات وأخفاها عن السجان. What was written will never be known. طبعا دكتور مانت لما سمع هذه القصة العجيبة كانت ذكرته بما كان يفعل في السجن. He was doing the same. He was writing notes and he was hiding these notes of the jailers. وكان بيخفي هذه المذكرات التي يكتبها عن السجان. Dr. Manette gasped and put his hands on his head. Terror spread across his face for a moment. ولحظات من الرعب بدأت تبدو على وجهه في هذه اللحظة. Lucy felt worried about her father and asked if he was ill, but the doctor recovered himself quickly, saying, I just felt some raindrops. We should go inside. But Mr. Lorry had seen that look of terror before. شاهد هذه اللحظات من الرعب على وجهه من قبل. Miss Pross commentary. Miss Pross was Lucy's nurse and companion. She was devoted to her and always called her my ladybird. She didn't like the visits of Charles Darnley and Sidney Carton to her ladybird and believed that they were unworthy of her. كانت غير راضية عن الزيارات المتكررة من تشارلز دارني وسيدني كارتون وبتقول إن هي هم غير جديرين بيها. Dr. Manette has completely recovered and restored his memory, and he practices his old profession as a doctor. However, he still kept his shoemaker's bench and tools. كان لازال بيحتفظ بأدوات صناعة الأحذية. This means that his terrible memories and his suffering in the prison didn't easily pass away. لازالت ذكريات السجن الأليمة لازالت في ذاكرته ولم تختفي كلية بعد. Charles Darnley's story about the hidden message of the prisoner caused Dr. Manette a moment of terror because it reminded him of what he himself had done while he was in prison 18 years before. ما فعله تشارلز دارني إن ذكر هذه القصة ذكرت دكتور مانت بما كان يفعله في السجن من 18 سنة مرت. Now to the questions and answers. Question number 1. How was Dr. Manette's new life in London? He was completely recovered. He lived peacefully in a small house with his beloved daughter and devoted maid. He returned to practicing his old job again as a doctor. Quotation here. I was just wondering why the doctor still keeps those things. طبعا هنا هذه الأشياء المقصود بها اللي هي show making tools. Comment. Mr. Lorry said this to Miss Pross when he notes that Dr. Manette still kept the show-making tools in his bedroom. These things might always remind him of his miserable life in prison بأيام التعيسة التي قضاها في السجن. I wouldn't know. Quotation again. I wouldn't know, but I do know that we are having more visitors today. Another of these young men who are unworthy of my dear Lucy's time. Comment. Miss Pross said this to Mr. Lorry when she was complaining about the visits of Mr. Charles Darnley and Sidney Carton to Lucy. She felt that they weren't worthy of her. كانت بتشعر إن هؤلاء these gentlemen are not worthy of her time. Who was Solomon? What mistake had he done? من هو سولومون؟ وما الخطأ الذي ارتكبه؟ He was Miss Pross' brother. He had taken all, that's his mistake. He had taken all of his sister's belongings years ago and left her in poverty. أخذ كل ممتلكات أخته وتركها تعيش في فقر. What story did Charles Darnley tell them about his prison? This question is important. When he was in prison, he learned something very curious. Some workers found the ashes of a paper written by some unknown prisoner while they were doing some repairs in a prison cell. What was the effect of Darnley's story on Dr. Manette and why? ما هو تأثير قصة تشارلز دارني على دكتور مانيت ولماذا؟ Charles Darnley's story about the hidden message of the prisoner caused Dr. Manette a moment of terror. سببت له لحظات من الرعب because it reminded هنا السبب because it reminded him of what he himself had done while he was in prison 18 years before? Now, this is the last question of that chapter, my dear students. I hope you have understood and got all the meanings and the questions and answer of that chapter. Till we meet again with chapter 6, inshallah. Don't forget to put like and subscribe to the channel. Wishing you the best of time. Thank you and goodbye.